All right, welcome in. This is the Front Row Podcast with Coach Mark Gottfried, and as always, I'm having an absolute blast, and today's guest is going to be a lot of fun. I've known Steve Lavin for a long, long time and extremely proud of your career and everything you've done. But before I welcome you in, let's kind of just go back a little bit. Obviously, was the head basketball coach at UCLA, head basketball coach at St. John's, currently at University of San Diego. Also was worked for Fox Sports for many years at ESPN. We kind of overlapped there. We had a great time together. And we worked together at UCLA, and both were fortunate enough to be part of a national championship team in 1995. So, Steve, welcome in.
Great to be with you. And you played a central role in the opportunity that was presented from Coach Harrick, but your encouragement and you vouching for me is what led to that gift to be able to join the staff and be a part of that national championship team.
Well, thank you. We had such a great time, and you've just had this marvelous run through, sports and basketball. And what I like to do, Steve, a little bit is kind of give people that will listen a little bit of an idea, because you grew up, in the Bay Area, just north of San Francisco there, Marin County. And just tell us a little bit about that and growing up and, basketball. And then also I think what's important, and I've always admired about you, is what an impact your parents have had on you kind of growing up. But give us a little idea, you're growing up there, and how'd you get going into basketball?
Yeah, I actually was the youngest of 6 children. I had 3 older brothers, and they all played basketball. And my father had played basketball, was a Hall of Fame high school player at St. Ignatius High School, and he was the player of the decade in the 1940s. And then went on to the University of San Francisco and played for Pete Newell as well as Phil Wolpert, 2 Hall of Fame coaches. And eventually my father was inducted into the San Francisco Hall of Fame. So basketball family, and looking up to my father and my older brothers. I didn't pick up basketball until really freshman year in high school is when I really started to pursue it more seriously. I had played baseball, I had played soccer, but I was late to the game, kind of a late developer, and I think also wanted to blaze my own trail initially, and then eventually arrived at a place where I was ready to pursue basketball. And so being in the Bay Area was a wonderful experience, and as you mentioned, my mother and father were outstanding teachers in the home with their 6 children. My father was an educator at all levels, from Sir Francis Drake High School, Reardon High School, College of Marin, Dominican College, San Francisco State, Cal Berkeley. He was an English literature, philosophy, and a poetry teacher. He authored over 17 books, 19 books to be specific, and most of them were centered on composition and writing. And so my parents really encouraged education in the home, but also in terms of the pursuit of it with, earning a college degree and how important that is in terms of sustaining you in life. And so all the right virtues and values, we sometimes paid more attention to our parents, at sometimes more than others. But as I go through the decades and through life, I'm grateful that my mother and father really emphasized and instilled in us the important kind of fundamentals of life.
When we were together at UCLA there for that period, and, my dad played an integral role in my life. Obviously, he was a coach and athletic director. And so, you always have that person that you can, call at times to say, hey, Dad, I'm struggling with this, or hey, this happened, or, what's your thoughts on this thing? And it was always great. And a lot of times I agreed, sometimes I didn't. But I always remember with you, Steve, that your parents, first of all, they're amazing. They were wonderful. They're just amazing people. But the time I was able to be around them, very warm, very kind, but very astute and bright, kind of the way. Like, I always felt your father could say things in a way. You and I both with Coach Wooden, he was the best at these little golden nugget sayings. There was just so many. But your dad was like that, I thought, and he was so wise. And I thought he was just such an asset for you I'm sure your mother too. I'm not, but it just seemed to me that your dad kind of was that person, possibly for you.
Yeah, I think they were a great team. They were married for 60 years. They're from that generation, similar to your mother and father, and they loved their children, unconditionally, and really set a good example. And to me, that's still the most powerful form of teaching is, leading by example. And young people are watching. And even if they're reluctant or there's some resistance because of the natural rebellious stages we go through in our life as we try and find ourselves, that foundation, that anchor is something we return to. And my mother was in human resources at Wells Fargo, some other financial institutions, and that is a position that's difficult, but also is about working with people. And so my father in the classroom, my mother in corporate America, and both of them in the home and raising 6 children really set a good example and raised the bar. And they had challenging times. When you're together 60 years raising 6 children, naturally there's going to be some difficulty. But they were able to somehow reinvent themselves. They took a 6-month time out after 25 years of marriage and then came back and reinvented themselves. And it was really my mother giving my dad a wake-up call because I think his focus on the career led her to feel as though she wasn't getting the support from her partner, from my father. And then they came back for 35 more years for 60 total. So their resilience within the marriage is something that had a profound effect on me, just the ability to keep an open mind. There was some flexibility and humility, openness on my father's part in terms of understanding he had to change if he wanted my mother to stay in that relationship with him. And so we draw on those experiences, but again, we make mistakes full steam ahead, and that's how we learn. As they say, we live life forward, not backwards, but we do draw from those prior experiences.
Without a doubt. Steve, obviously we were together at UCLA. Jim Harrick played a pivotal role. We were able to win a national championship, and you later became the head coach. But, outside of Coach Harrick, and we can talk about that later, but talk about some of the people that kind of, outside of your parents, who really kind of had kind of shaped and helped mold you a little bit, because I've always you get it, like you understand. Like some people don't understand. There are people along the way that have helped us. We've all had it, and you have always been very good about acknowledging those people that have helped you along the way. So let's just maybe not talk about Jim, because we worked together with Jim and it was wonderful. It was great. We won it. But some other people like that you would say, man, these couple people really kind of pushed me in the right direction or encouraged me in a way. Who would those guys be?
There's some going back to grammar school. I had, some learning disabilities, in terms of processing. I was dyslexic and dysgraphic. And so there was a special ed teacher, Nora Ernst. And I'd have to go there each day, and it was called the Learning Lab, which was a positive spin for individuals that were really challenged in terms of math, science, foreign language. But it made you feel as though you were going on a trip to the moon or something. When you entered that lab, it was a wonderful opportunity, like you're with NASA or someone going on a space shuttle. And then there were other classes that I could, re-enter into. But Nora Ernst, her patience and her kind of nurturing and helping develop my confidence was really critical at that stage, because you're, 8, 9, 10 years old. And then Carol Tateshi in 7th grade, she was another teacher that kind of took it to another level and saw abilities in writing. And that might be somewhat in the DNA or the genetic makeup, because my father was a writer. But she helped bring that forward and really gave me some confidence as well. There were coaches. George Lewis at Sir Francis Drake High School was my freshman coach. Pete Hayward was my varsity coach. And I think sports, baseball, soccer, basketball, also helped build that confidence. And as they say, self-esteem, because you're excelling in an area that maybe helps with that. And when you're not knocking it out of the park academically. And then eventually the academic side kicked in probably by my senior year in high school and through college, and eventually got a degree in communications with an emphasis in film, television. But those were some key mentors. Kevin Wilson was my college coach at San Francisco State and Chapman University, and he had played for Bill Musselman at Ashland College, was an All-American there, and also was an assistant at the University of Minnesota with Bill Musselman. And having him as a coach at San Francisco State and Chapman, he really is the one that kind of fueled the desire to be a college coach. And working summer camps, under his mentorship and leadership led to us starting our own summer basketball camps as a family. So those were a few, and obviously Gene Cady, who, opened the door for me in this business, and Jim Harrick, and yourself helped me come out west, come back west for the UCLA position. So, and once we're at UCLA, John Wooden.
Boom.
So
takes off.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. So here's a question, and here's what happens to me. I know you get this all the time. I get it. I have young people all the time, they're graduating college, or guys played at college, or they've played for me, or maybe if you've had players that have played for you, and they want to get in coaching, college coaching. Coach, I want to do it. I want to get in. Okay, and can you help me? And that beginning, people don't realize a lot of times. It was like myself. I go to UCLA. I'm a graduate assistant coach. I'm making $600 a month as a stipend while I'm going to class. And then you eventually came in this similar role. But when you got out of college at Chapman College, and all of a sudden this opportunity is there at Purdue, because a lot of times young people, they really don't understand how you had to go about it. Like, you're not making any money. There's no money to be made. You're going to sleep on the couch. You're going to sleep somewhere, and I'm just going to try to get my foot in the door any possible way I can. And then if I can get my foot in there, then from there I can kind of get rolling.
Exactly.
But you did that. You took that kind of step of courage. And honestly, Steve, a lot of people, they won't do that. They want to stay at home. They don't, you took that step. And talk about that process of getting involved at Purdue when, the odds probably, there wasn't any, it wasn't like you were a first-team All-American playing for, Indiana University or Purdue. You're coming from Chapman, and boom, here you go. So you had to have a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the coincidence, right? Because we both entered the business, I think, the same year, 1988, 89. And so it was a situation where I had corresponded. I started writing letters to coaches that I had respect for. Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, Bobby Knight at Indiana, Gene Cady at Purdue, Jerry Tarkanian and Tim Gergovich at UNLV, Jim Brandenburg was at San Diego State at the time, Hank Egan at the University of San Diego. Then there were some junior college and high school coaches, Don Johnson at Cypress Junior College here in Southern California. And so through corresponding, becoming pen pals with them, I was basically asking for a roadmap and advice and direction if I aspired to someday walk in their shoes and be a head coach in college basketball. What steps should I take? And thankfully, the vast majority did write back. And whether it was books to read, clinics to attend, all of them suggested working summer camps. And that's how you and I met, through the summer camp circuit. And led to going to Purdue and spending some time there during the summer, as well as Indiana, and going over to Vegas to be part of the Runnin' Rebels camps. And you're meeting people, you're watching some teachers at an elite level that have mastered, their profession. And then I went back my last year at Chapman. I had exhausted my playing eligibility. I was a resident assistant at Chapman University. But between semesters, there's like a 5-6 week intercession. And I spent 3 weeks at Indiana University, couch surfing, and then did the same at Purdue for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that really was the key kind of pivotal moment. Being a part of timeouts and pregame talks, half-game talks, breaking down game film with Coach Knight and Ron Felony and Dan Dockich and Tates Locke and Joby Wright at IU at the time. And then Coach Katie, Kevin Stallings, Bruce Weber, Dave Wood, Tom Ryder. And that experience was so inspiring. And I really wanted to coach at that level when I came back to Chapman, finished my degree. And Kevin Stallings moved on to Kansas to work for Roy Williams that summer. And Coach Katie gave me a call and said, I've got this entry-level position. It's a graduate assistant. It doesn't pay. But I think it could be a good opportunity for you.
Yeah.
And obviously it was a chance of a lifetime. And I said that to Coach. And he said, well, I don't know about all that. But I do think it'll be an opportunity to get a foot in the door. And I think you can add some value, and it'll be good for you as well, you know. And that was 35 years ago. And so Purdue, those first 3 years were kind of the foundation. And then continued to build that foundation under Coach Harrick at UCLA.
You know, it's interesting, Steve, because everybody, and I've had a lot of high achievers like yourself, people that have done amazing things, and there's always these pivotal points where they have to like step out, and which you did that. Like you stepped out and went for it at Purdue in Indiana, got to know those people. You did get your foot in the door. And, you know, a lot of times in life, it's just taking that chance to say, man, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to go. What do I got to lose? You know, at your age, like, hey, but I'm going to go and I'm going to try and I'm going to learn and I'm going to do the best I can. And if somebody recognizes that I'm doing a great job, I'll keep, you know, advancing. But you were able to do that. And I think it, because we live in this world, we don't take that for granted, but some young people do. They don't really understand like what you did, what you had to do. And, you know, even myself coming to Los Angeles, and I'm 24 years old, and I'm going to be a graduate assistant coach, and, you know, it's not very glamorous, you know. Mm-hmm. And if you got to go grab coffee, you got to go grab coffee. If they want somebody to drive you to the airport, then you're going to be the one driving you to the airport. Like, I'm going to do everything I can, but I'm going to be here, and I'm going to make an impression. And I'm sure you probably had to do some of that at Purdue.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, for me, the key was Coach Katie would give me a stack of Wendy's coupons, and Wendy's at the time had those wonderful salad bars that had some pasta, had the salad. You could get a refill on the Biggie iced tea. And so I'd hit Wendy's early, I'd hit it late, I'd bring some to go. There was also the MCL cafeteria in West Lafayette, and it was mostly for older people, but I was one of the few young people because we had those certificates to get in there. And that was, you know, mashed potatoes and chicken and soup and bread. And so that really helped make ends meet. And I was sleeping on the couch with one of Coach Katie's best friends, Tommy Ream. And he passed going into my second year. So I eventually had to get my own apartment, but I'd been sleeping on his couch for a year. So you just kind of make ends meet. My parents naturally looking at me sideways as the debt begins to accumulate. And especially after 3 years at Purdue, because I was graduate assistant for 2 years, volunteer for a year, then came and joined you guys at UCLA, was volunteer for another year, and then the restricted earnings coach for 2 or 3 years. Right. And there was a 16,000 cap on what you could make. And so I was in debt probably $75,000, $80,000 by the time I become a full-time assistant.
Wow.
And I think that was for $60,000, right? As the number one assistant at UCLA. Just different times, right? Now players with NIL are making $1 million a year. I'll never forget George Zedek, who we both love and was a central part of our national championship at UCLA from the Czech Republic. And, you know, at night when you're overseeing or participating, helping with study hall in our offices, George and I would talk. And he knew that I had aspirations to be a head coach, but he couldn't get over the fact that I was working for free as a volunteer assistant, that I really didn't have an income. And so he would bring his friends and he'd say, Coach, tell them how much money you make. And I'd say, 0. He'd say, a donut? I'd say, donut. 0, George. And he thought that was great because I had a phone, I had my business cards, I had a desk, came to work every day, but you don't make any money. Now, Coach Harrick would hook us up with the Samsung Electronics team, the Korean Basketball Association, and he'd help. You know, I'll never forget, you know, he cut me a check for $5,000 one summer, and initially said, you got to pay me back, but then said, you know what, you can keep it. And that made a big difference, so I wasn't accumulating more debt working for free. And there were people like the Pumps were saying, you should go with Seth Greenberg to Long Beach State. There's a full-time spot there. You got to get on the road. You got to recruit. And there was something about UCLA that was such a wonderful opportunity, the staff we had, the players we were coaching, the university itself, that I wasn't in a rush to go anywhere else. I felt, even though it's restricted earnings, it's volunteer assistant, that it just felt right. It was going to take something ideal to ever leave UCLA, or getting fired.
Yep. Which
One of the two.
Which happens in our world.
Then you got no choice.
But I look back in our run at UCLA, and I say this all the time. UCLA produces such a great graduate, well-rounded, smart, diverse. I mean, it's a wonderful school. But we had a period there, if you look back on it, it was almost kind of magical. Like, you think of the guys we had on the team. Then now later, when you became the head coach, you had great players and you had great relationships with those guys. But during that time period with you and I and Lorenzo Romar as the assistants, Coach Harrick the head coach, and the O'Bannons and the Toby Baileys and J.R. Hendersons and all the guys we had, and Tyus Edney and Cameron Dollar. I mean, we can go on and list them all. But great young people. And then our staff was really, really good, and it was really cohesive, and everybody had something different. Lorenzo had certain things that he was really good at, relationship with the guys, and it's just amazing how good. Same with you in that regard. But we were all different, but it all just kind of came together in an amazing way for all of us to have this magical run in '95 where we won the national championship. And I tell people all the time, when I was younger, I was 30 years old, so we were both probably 30. You're thinking, oh, this is probably going to happen a couple more times in my lifetime. And then you realize later how hard it actually is. But that period was such a unique time. I mean, you've had a lot of success. I had success. But that little period of time was really, really magical. I think it was.
No doubt. I mean, there's never a day that goes by where in some form or fashion you're reminded of how special, call it alignment, right? Destiny, fate, just good fortune of a group of people that came together and were able to have a run as we did to win a national championship. And I often say to my staffs that one of many gifts that Coach Harrick had was the ability to hire assistant coaches and mentor them, but also allow them to gain experience in all the aspects that it takes to become a head coach, from the academic side to scouting to fundraising to on the floor teaching and game planning. And so I think one of the reasons his coaches have gone on to have success, if you look back to his Pepperdine days, his UCLA days, his Georgia days, the Rhode Island days, is he mentored and allowed his coaches to really sharpen their skills and develop the important attributes or characteristics, the traits that it's going to take to be successful as a head coach. And those meetings I look back on fondly because we sometimes would butt heads.
Oh, yeah.
And oftentimes, Lorenzo, you and I, we had never been head coaches, and he had been a head coach for decades. And he would listen to us and sometimes implement some of our ideas, and other times he'd say, here's what we're going to do. And but he let us get up on the whiteboard and actually, draw up some plays or talk about what we think we might.
And he'd have his pencil.
Be better
he'd be
doing.
writing on his pencil.
Absolutely. And
he'd have his pencil.
And he'd take the glasses off and push back, from the table, the practice plan. He'd say, "Go ahead, put it up there, put it up on the board," And then we'd show him, and then he'd say, "I like that. That's real nice." So the 4-man cross screens. Oh, you got the big on little screen there. I like that, little on big. Oh. That's nice. Tell you what, here's what I want you to do. Get a piece of paper, get a pad of paper, write it down. He goes, and then get a folder and put it inside that folder, and then open up the file cabinet and file it away. And when you're a head coach, that's something you might want to do. Here's what we're going to do today. Okay, 315 to 325, 325 to flanker, anti-over, high post offense. And as I went through the decades and became a head coach, my appreciation and respect for him, goes through the roof.
Yeah.
Similar to our parents.
Yeah.
The older we get and having life experience, you realize, oh, that's why mom and dad emphasized that, or what they were trying to teach us. And I think it's the same with Coach Harrick. And we can have some real good belly laughs recalling some of the stories. Shoo, out you go, pissants. I've heard enough. Kicking us out of his office because he had some business to do. I got to get something done today. Out you go. Close the door behind you.
We had a good old time, boy. That was a lot of fun. All right, so now we're going to fast forward. So you're at UCLA, you're an assistant, and our group had I'd went on to become a head coach. Lorenzo was a head coach. You're there, and now it's November. UCLA makes a decision, and they're gonna fire Jim, and boom, all of a sudden, bang, here we come, and we're gonna name Steve Lavin the interim coach. Now we both know, and everybody knows, UCLA, it's not like you're at little school out in the middle of nowhere. It's all eyes are now on. It's on, and you're talking about the most storied basketball program in the history of college basketball. So, in your gut, kind of walk me through a little bit. You and I've talked about some of this stuff in the past, but like that right away, that feeling. I had Dabo Swinney from Clemson football, and similar. They make a coaching change mid-year, and the AD calls him down, and boom, Dabo, we're going to make you the interim. And there's excitement, but then it's also like, oh boy. And so, but for you, walk me through that right at the moment, that initial, what's going through your mind, your gut, your everything, because this is a big deal. This is a big deal. This is not a little deal. No, this is a big one.
Yeah, time traveling back to that moment, it was overwhelming. It was also an intersection of both sobering, because your boss, Coach Harrick, has just been fired. And that's someone that gave you an opportunity to come to UCLA. And then you're also aware of the opportunity. So you're not able to fully enjoy the opportunity, A, because your boss just got fired, and then you're also just trying to make it through that day, because there wasn't any guarantees that it was going to be interim for the season. It was a national search is launched, and if they find a candidate next week, next month, then you're out, or you finish that season and then you're out.
Right.
So it was, overwhelming. I will say that, back to Coach Harrick, Coach Katie, my parents, that your instincts kick in and your training, even though it's limited and there are so many things that you don't know, because you don't know. It's the first time, at the rodeo of being a head coach. But thankful to the mentors and the teachers and Coach Wooden, Pete Newell, who had coached my father. There were people that I was able to call and really leaning in to their advice. And I had good assistant coaches. The program had such a strong foundation because of what Coach Harrick had put in place and because of the national championship. It was this mix of sobering but also inspired.
Sure.
And I'll never forget, Coach Wooden said, you have to stay in the moment. The best advice I received. He said, it's going to be natural to be looking over your shoulder because Jim was just let go. And you have those feelings because he's experiencing pain. And yet, what the team deserves, the players that came to UCLA, they need you to focus fully on building the team, taking it forward, and doing the best you can on a daily basis, which is, his whole definition of success is doing the best we can on a daily basis, and peace of mind that comes from knowing that you did the best you can. So there was a group of people that really helped me navigate, and our players had experience. So being able to lean in on a Cameron Dollar, a Charles O'Bannon, Toby Bailey, Chris Johnson, J.R. Henderson, we had really good basketball players that had experience. And so Jelani McCoy, as gifted as they come in terms of anchoring things at both ends of the court and the lane. So it was surreal. And leaning in on mentors and people like Coach Katie was also someone that said, hey, here's what you really need to do at this point. But that stay in the moment, which is a lesson we take forward, beyond just coaching, it's life.
And it's hard because even, I was young and dumb back then. We were all kind of young and we didn't really know. But when you become a head coach, and I remember Jim telling me this one day, Jim Harrick, we were talking, we were at Cal. This was the year before you came. It was my first year, I think it was, or my second year. And we're going to shoot around, and I sit in the front seat in the bus, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning, and we're going to ride over day of the game and do a little shoot around at the gym. And I hopped up in that front seat, and I said, Coach, what's the biggest difference between being a head coach and an assistant coach? And he just looked right at me, as only Jim Harrick could do. He just looked right beside me, and he just said, lonely. And at the time, I didn't really understand it. Then later, I become the head coach at Murray State in Alabama, and you realize, and for you, probably right at that moment, you're so excited because you have to take advantage of the opportunity. You have to. You're going for it, and like Coach Wooden, great advice, but all of a sudden it kind of becomes a lonely position. It's a lonely seat. People don't realize that as a head coach. When we're assistants, when you and I and Lorenzo are assistants, and we would never, ever publicly be disloyal, but we could go and sit somewhere and say, we should play more zone or whatever. You always do that. That's part of, you have your peers as assistants, but when you become the head coach, you don't really have that. All of a sudden, you're by yourself, and now here you are, you're young, it's UCLA, and one thing I always thought was good for you, that would helped you and was great for you, you had such a great relationship with our players, all those guys, all those group. And I think they rallied for you. I really do. I think they all said, okay, this is unfortunate. Coach Harrick, everybody hated it because they loved Jim and all that. But they said, all right. And as the season went on, that very first, that year, you really got better towards the end. But you had to feel some of that lonely. That's part of it. It's part of the turf for our whole careers as head coaches. But even in the moment as a young person, that had to be like, whoa. You go home at night and you're by yourself. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that kind of mind-numbing, surreal feel to it all. And the good news was you're so focused out of necessity on the task at hand that it didn't really allow the overwhelmed element to dominate. There were moments where you are aware this is an overwhelming, mind-numbing experience, but because we're creatures of routine, right? Teams and athletes, we have a drum roll, we have a routine, and staying in that routine, staying in the moment and in that routine from the prior 8 years at Purdue and UCLA was the training that I relied on. And naturally, there's things you're going to, modify or make adjustments as we do when we coach. But the foundation and the approach was leaning back into my training at Purdue and at UCLA with Coach Harrick.
And the foundation, you had a foundation that was kind of built there that allowed you to lean on that. So,
yes. Who was really helpful too? And we missed him when he retired, but Jim Milhorn. Jim Milhorn, long time, associate athletic director at UCLA, and he had played for Coach Wooden before the championships and was central in our schedule and so many different aspects, really supervising men's basketball. But that year, he traveled with our team. And he was getting close to retirement. I think he stayed on an extra year because of the transition. They were doing the national search. Tubby Smith was interviewed. I know Rick Majerus had interest, naturally some other big names. And every year at UCLA, if you lose a couple ball games, there's the discussion, the scuttlebutt about time for a coaching change. And there's Rick Pitino, John Calipari, and you get accustomed to it. And it's a good training, good preparation in terms of focusing on the things you have control over. Because if you begin to focus on things you don't have control over, now it affects the things that you do have control over. And but Jim Milhorn up at Washington State, we're in the Palouse Pullman, and the night before a game, he said, don't be afraid to play the zone. And we
had a matchup zone that was a variation of what we had done at UCLA with Coach Harrick, but also had some of the Bill Musselman matchup zone elements to it because I'd learned that from my coach, Kevin Wilson, that Ashland College connection. And we really only had 7 players in terms of the depth that we were utilizing. And so the zone kept us out of foul trouble, kept Jelani McCoy at the rim, it kept J.R. Henderson at the rim, so we could protect the castle, so to speak, in terms of the defensive side of things. And having your better players in the game, because they're not in foul trouble, helps both ends of the court. And we were less foul prone, so teams weren't lining up at the free throw line against us. But I always think of some critical intersections advice that Jim Milhorn gave. And he was drawn from his experience from Coach Wooden, probably in the 1950s or early 60s. I don't want to date him. I think he's still with us, maybe living in Arizona, retired.
You know, Steve, you've had a great run. So you had the period at UCLA. You were the head coach at St. John's. A great run on television at ESPN and Fox, and I did that as well. And we kind of had these careers that were kind of mimicking along the way. And you know, we could have 10 episodes, you and I, and we could have a great fun time. But let's jump all the way. You've gotten back into coaching now, and you've been out of coaching, which is interesting. And you've got a great job at University of San Diego. But the game today, and when I say the game, I'm not necessarily talking about just the X's and O's of the game. The game in general, the recruiting game. Now we have NIL where kids are allowed to be compensated. They're allowed to get paid. Schools have these collectives that are kind of an outside arm, which kind of kids can get paid through. You've got this transfer portal where they've opened it up where kids can now transfer, just switch teams, you know, all over the place. And it has dramatically changed college sports from what you and I knew it from years and years ago for a long period of time. So this change, this shift in the last couple years is monumental. This is a massive difference. You still got to coach your team, and they're still young people, and those things are the same, but around it. And so the way it is today compared to whether you're at St. John's or UCLA, how do you see it and navigate it? Because it's different. It's obviously different than what it was.
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of those universal skills and an approach using a compass, flexibility, and being able to modify and adapt and adjust and quickly pivot to changing times. So many of the same teachings that we use in sport, because in its purest form, sport's a great metaphor for life, right? That's why people are inspired by sport and why youth sports are so important. Learning all these valuable lessons of discipline and the ability to adjust and communication and cohesiveness and being a good teammate. And so really drawing on my background with great mentors and parents and my coaching and playing experiences, and you continue to, model those important traits. And so the landscape has changed, and you can't dwell on the changes, but instead you have to adapt. And not that you don't have a philosophical discussion in a conversation like this about how things have changed and look back maybe through, rose-colored lenses on, romanticizing the past. And I think there were elements to the past that were better, or we should at least say we were fortunate that we came up in the game when we did. But our parents may have felt that way about, their generation as opposed to our generation. So I think part of that is a universal human experience. But I've just tried to stay interested in our players and in building a team, and then flexible in how we're going to do that. There are some things that non-negotiables, the constants, right? Physical, mental conditioning, mastery of fundamentals, being able to execute them quickly and properly under duress. Building a cohesive team in terms of sharing the basketball and thinking of others and being a good person in terms of how you treat others and treating them with respect. Those things are constants. They're not changing. They're bedrock. But I do think how we recruit, how we motivate players, coming up with fresh and original creative ways to connect with them and engage with them, to get them closer to their full potential, or at least
closer to the full expression of their potential. They're never going to arrive and realize your full potential. But that journey and that effort to get there is where you really learn. That's where the growth happens. And so staying, focused on those elements, and then maybe that helps with retention. Maybe if you have the kind of relationship that you ideally want to have with your players, it's not going to be perfect with all of them. But if you're earnest and sincere and unconditionally care about them, they're more likely to either stay, or it's going to at least make their decision to leave more difficult. Right. They're going to really weigh on it. Where I think if we're not focused on those relationships, then you're more likely to have the turnstile, 10 players out, 10 in. But there are some very surprising, like Aiden Mahaney just hit the portal at St. Mary's, and I never would have seen that coming. But it's an indication of where we are when it comes to this space and the kind of dollars that are out there. And as you know, it's complicated because people in each individual player's camp, are advising them. And there are times where they are informed and have their best interests at heart, and then there are people in that camp that may not be informed, or maybe they don't have a background in coaching or education, and maybe they don't have their best interests at heart. And so also sorting through that and being able at the same time, with all that said, to let go and not try and control everything, back to focus on what you can control, because you could drive yourself batty if you're trying to control every aspect of a young person's life. And I think parents learn that. Sometimes you've just got to take a deep breath and allow life to happen and trust that they'll make the right decisions, and whether that's to leave or to return.
Do you feel like, Steve, a little bit now, and I think Nick Saban might have said this, that the developing players, like, you and I go way back, and times do change, but we look at the guys that we brought in, like a Tyus Edney, who's with you now as an assistant coach, and you were able to, coach him, we all did, for 4 years, and, you see the development, and that was kind of the beauty of maybe coaching. And now I'm worried a little bit that we as coaches, we don't necessarily always get to have that opportunity to develop year after year after year after year, because kids are they're just so anxious to hunt for something else. And that probably, I'm not coaching right now, but when I'm watching and listening and talking to everybody, that's the one part that kind of, kids transfer, and I was a transfer, but I sat out a year way back in 1983. But maybe as a coach, that probably hurts me a little bit, because I loved helping guys develop. That was part of the joy of watching a guy come in, and some snot-nosed freshman that thought he knew everything, and blah blah blah, and he really wasn't ready to play like he thought he was, or wasn't ready to be a great player. And then you mature and help them. We've helped so many guys, and that's maybe a little bit, we're losing that a little bit, potentially.
Yeah, I think the sense of community that team sports gives us an opportunity to be a part of, and the continuity within that community is where you really develop relationships and rapport, and there's a story, because you're on this journey together, coaches and players and trainers and managers and team doctors. And to be able to put together 4 or 5 years of a player red shirts together in that community with that continuity, that's the big question with this turnstile era of the portal. Do you have the opportunity to kind of connect and create community given the constant turnover? Now, we're a little unique at USD in that we're going to have every player return. We'll be one of the few teams in the country that only one player at this point's entered the portal. We had 2 players, but one decided to come back after 8 days, Wayne McKinney. And then Deuce Turner's in the portal, had a terrific season. He's going to earn his degree. And so he's looking at some other opportunities. And we're happy for him, because on the one hand, that's a feather in our cap, because he leaves behind a space that someone else can fill with those same aspirations and dreams. And when we recruit them, we talk about wanting the best for them. So just because they leave doesn't mean they're bad character, come from a bad family. And I tell them that. I said, hey, it just means this is your life, your dream, and you're driving it, and we're here to support you. And we'd love to have you back. And we talk about the uncertainties when you transfer. The grass isn't always greener. And then talk about what are the assets of returning, and have that conversation, have that
discourse so they can weigh the options. And then you have to wish them well.
Right. It's part of the landscape. It is what it is, and we're not changing it. And I think, again, when I've talked to coaches in football and basketball, the guys that push back against adapting probably aren't going to last very long. The guys that are going to say, okay, this is the deal. I'm going to embrace it best I can, and I'm going to live within this, and I'm going to do the best I can for each individual person and our team. And whether it's, the NIL money they may make or, trying to create that for them or playing opportunities and, all those things. But you have to embrace it. I think if you don't, you're dead. I think you're cooked in our world because you're not putting the toothpaste back in a tube. It is what it is. And so.
Yeah, when you look at all the industries, right, that's the key. I mean, any Fortune 500 company, a mom and pop operation where they built their name and their success off of having a good reputation and delivering some element, whether it's a great coffee shop or Italian restaurant. But from the highest levels, business to smaller businesses in any walk of life, the people that have longevity have demonstrated that flexibility and that openness to adapt and adjust and stay ahead of the curve. And even the game keeps changing with the shot clock, with the FIBA rules coming in, the three-point line, and obviously there was a lot of controversy when there are these rule changes, but it has a way of working itself out. And so what seems revolutionary, and it is, 15 or 20 years from now won't seem so revolutionary.
That's right.
And we've seen it, designated hitter, the playoff system in Major League Baseball.
Conference realignment, all the conferences. How about that?
Bingo.
We would have never thought, you and I, in the Pac-12 in the 80s, 90s, in the early 2000s, we'd have never, ever thought UCLA and USC would not be in the Pac-10, Pac-8, Pac-10, Pac-12. Here they are in the Big Ten.
During the NCAA tournament, seeing the equivalent of Super Bowl commercials, but for college basketball with the current student athletes that are competing in the games. That would have been, we were so worried about the NCAA rules, that those things seem mind-blowing. And you think of all the coaches that were fired for things that are now legal, cash and cars.
Trust me.
Housing.
I know too well.
Right. So it's really, because there was an evolution for decades and decades and decades as this became a billion-dollar enterprise, billions, then eventually you have a revolution. And that's how it's worked through the history of our time is if there is an evolution, then eventually you have a revolution, whether it's civil rights, French Revolution, and I'm not saying that civil rights and this NCAA college athletics revolution are on the same playing field. But Ed O'Bannon, back to UCLA, is the one that blazed the trail with Sonny Vaccaro and a couple other athletes and changed this landscape.
And he did. I told him you couldn't make it. You guys played, but UCLA's last Pac-12 regular season game, they played Arizona State. We all got together and I told Ed that night, Ed O'Bannon, I said, Ed, every player in America right now should give you 1% of everything they make, 1%, because without Ed O'Bannon and pushing forward. And you and I both know Ed as probably the most unassuming, quiet, nicest, classiest, just guy, But he pushed and created there was enough momentum to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And now student athletes, and we were watching it, and I'm watching Caitlin Clark at Iowa, the female player, and, students are benefiting. And really, honestly, maybe without Ed O'Bannon pushing that through, none of this might have been going on right now. So the players, I hope they recognize there's this guy named Ed O'Bannon that used to play at UCLA, and we need to thank that guy.
Really the equivalent of Curt Flood, right, in Major League Baseball with the free agency and what that created. And Ed was the right person at the right time. He used that platform to really revolutionize college athletics as we know it. And thank goodness, that now student athletes will be able to share in the profits and also independent of sharing the profits of,
NCAA tournament or BCS, and whether that happens or the pay for play eventually comes in or they become full-time employees, just having the opportunity on the name, image, likeness side of it, which I think is what a lot of the players struggled with, kind of that element of injustice that, you know, their jersey and their number is being sold in the bookstore, but they're struggling, you know, to have enough coin to get some pizza or go on a date. And same with the video games, right? So, yeah, he has an amazing legacy as a student athlete at UCLA and bringing that 11th national championship to be hung from the rafters, you know, the banner and Poly Pavilion. But long lasting, his legacy will be more profound in how he's changed college athletics forever.
He has. There's no question. Well, as we wrap up, Steve, you know, there's always that picture, and when you have it, I have it. I'm sure it's in my phone. We'll figure it out. But it's as the clock winds down. You know, I can remember it. I always tell people all the time when we were on the bench in the national championship game, and it's 30 seconds left, and you're up, you know, 6 or 8, and you know, kind of like, hey, we got this. It's happening. And then it's 20 seconds. Then you look up there and it's 10, and like the clock, it's like it's moving in slow motion. Then it's 5, 4, 3, and it was you and me and Lorenzo Romar and Jim Harrick, and it was just one of those things in life that you know, you wish everybody could have that feeling that we had, you know, and that picture that we'll always have of us right there, you know, and it creates a bond, Steve, and that we all can have for the rest of our lives, no matter what. We shared that together.
Yeah, pinnacle moments right there. Coach Harrick was on top of the mountain, National Coach of the Year, bringing back a national championship banner to Poly Pavilion at UCLA, and the only coach in the history of the school to win a national championship in men's basketball, because Coach Wooden had the other 10, but he was the only coach not named John Wooden to win one. And so it was the pinnacle for him, and then his young assistants and all those players and everyone associated with the program. It's a high point. It's a reference point. And also just, you know, it gives you faith and confidence that in the pursuit of goals, special things can happen. And it sounds trite or cliche, but it's really true. To have a team that lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament to Tulsa, and a year later be cutting down the nets. It's right out of Hollywood. We were appropriately in Southern California for that kind of Hollywood ending, you know.
Well, it was magical, and I tell you, Steve, you've had a great run. I'm hoping the best for you at the University of San Diego, and you know, hopefully you can win a lot of games and get in the tournament and advance, but also just, you know, have a great experience there. You know, as we get older, we see things differently than we did when we're 30. You know, now that
priorities change.
They do. And for you, you know, just to have a great experience, it's a great school, it's a great university there. You're in a great city, in a good league, and a competitive league, hard league, a lot harder than people realize, a lot more balanced than people realize. Outside of maybe Gonzaga over the last decade or two, they've kind of pushed out there, but. Hopefully you guys can, hopefully you guys, you know, can do that and just have that great experience. But I just want to thank you for coming. And
this has been great, and you're pretty good at this. Wow, I think you got a bright future.
We're having fun.
The media maven, Johnny Carson of the new millennial.
We're having a great time. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate you coming up, and we may even do another one day in the future.
I look forward to it.
Okay,
it was awesome,
right,
Mark.
Steve.
Thank you. Love
Thank
you.
You too.